Eli Turner lay sprawled on the soft furs of the Lakota camp, every nerve in his legs and back screaming in protest. The memory of the stampede lingered, each thundering hoofbeat echoing in his skull. In the distance, more hooves pounded the prairie. Drunken prospectors from Coyote Ridge, careening recklessly, unaware of the lives they threatened. He had just thrown himself in front of Nayeli, the chief's daughter, to shield her from harm. The taste of blood in his mouth and the sting of broken bones reminded him. The moment of choice was over, but the consequences had just begun. Before the chaos of the prairie ever touched his life, Eli Turner had known only the edges of the world, a place of dust and shadows where the wind seemed to whisper sorrow. Dustwood Hollow, a ragged collection of ramshackle cabins and shuttered windows, had been both cradle and cage for him. Born an orphan, he remembered nothing of his parents, only the hollow ache of absence and the bitter scolding of the town's unyielding residents. Mr. Harlan, the overseer of the stables where Eli had spent most of his youth, was a man whose voice carried like a whip across the wooden beams and haylofts, snapping with rigid authority at every imagined failing. Eli had learned early to blend into the background, to move like a shadow between hay bales and feed troughs, to work in silence and avoid drawing attention. Any mistake would be met with a sharp word, a bruise, or worse. A reminder that in Dustwood Hollow, invisibility was safety, and safety was survival. Life in the hollow was a sequence of monotonous cycles. Dawn brought the scent of wet hay and the harsh bray of horses already at the stables. Eli would awaken before the sun, his thin blanket pulled tight around his shoulders, aching from the night's uncomfortable sleep upon wooden planks. He learned to rise without complaint, to tie the horses' bridles with exacting care, to scrub the floors until his fingers burned and his knees ached. Each day passed in a blur of repetitive labor. Cleaning, feeding, carrying water from the shallow creek at the edge of town, and tending to the horses whose eyes seemed to see everything he tried to hide. He grew strong in ways that didn't show on the surface, muscles hardening under the strain of work, yet his spirit shrank into the cracks of the stables, hidden from the world. The townsfolk regarded him with the same casual neglect afforded to those who existed on the periphery of life. Children of wealth and influence ran freely, laughed loudly, and demanded attention. Eli moved quietly, a ghost at the edges of their games, silently observing the way families worked together, the way laughter could curl like smoke through a house, something he had never known. He envied them from afar but had long since accepted that such warmth and belonging were not meant for him. Loneliness had become a companion, a familiar presence that crept in during the long, dark nights and lingered through the cold, bitter winters. The wind cutting across Dustwood Hollow's empty streets sounded like a chorus of whispered reminders. You are alone, Eli Turner. You are nothing. Yet even within the confines of this quiet desolation, Eli found fragments of the world that offered small comforts. The stables became his sanctuary, the scent of hay and horses somehow soothing to a boy who had known little tenderness. He discovered a hidden joy in caring for creatures who depended on him, who returned his touch with soft nuzzles or gentle wickers. He memorized the patterns of each horse, learned the subtle signs of illness or fatigue, and in that knowledge found a measure of control over something outside himself. It was a life of minutiae, but in those details he carved a small space of mastery, a world that made sense, if only within the boundaries of the stables. Evenings were often the hardest. Eli would wander to the edge of town, trailing the narrow dirt roads that led into the barren outskirts, where the wind carried the scent of distant grasslands and wildflowers that he had only ever imagined. There, beneath the indifferent stars, he would imagine other lives, lives where someone waited for him, where voices called his name not in reprimand but in care. He dreamed of landscapes where the sky was wide and open, where adventure might exist beyond the fence posts and the walls of Mr. Harlan's oppressive household. He did not know that these dreams were seeds, waiting for a moment in which the soil of his world would be turned over, and he would be forced to choose whether to remain hidden or step into the unknown. His adolescence had been marked by routine and restraint. He learned quickly to anticipate Mr. Harlan's moods, to step lightly, to carry out tasks with efficiency that went unnoticed by everyone except the overseer. Friendships were fleeting, Trust was a dangerous thing. Other children in Dustwood Hollow had their families to shield them, their parents' ire or favor as a buffer between them and the harshness of the world. Eli had nothing of the sort. His peers often ignored him, or when they didn't, they teased, challenged, and tested the limits of his endurance. Each encounter left its mark, some visible, some internal, but all reinforcing the lesson that to survive meant to remain invisible, to be silent, to accept the world's neglect as inevitable. And yet, in the quietest hours, the boy who had grown up unseen, who had learned to measure every movement and word for survival, harbored a restless curiosity. He read the few tattered books he could find, poring over tales of far-off places, of heroes and warriors, of people who dared to step beyond the confines of expectation. In those stories, Eli glimpsed a life unlike his own, a life where courage mattered more than conformity, where actions defined a person rather than circumstance. He began to wonder if he might, someday, find a chance to step beyond the walls of Dustwood Hollow, to live as more than a shadow of a boy who had nothing. It was a quiet life, shaped by hardship, and yet those hardships had forged him in ways that would later reveal themselves. He had learned resilience, patience, and observation. He had learned how to endure pain, physical and emotional, without breaking, how to assess risk and act cautiously. He had learned to survive in the face of indifference, to rely on himself when the world offered nothing. And unknowingly, he had also learned to recognize when someone else was in peril, when a moment demanded action that might cost him everything. The world beyond Dustwood Hollow was waiting, but Eli Turner had no idea how violently it would demand he step into it, or how drastically it would transform the boy who had once accepted invisibility as his lot. The prairie stretched like an endless sea of gold and green, the tall grasses swaying in the wind as if they carried the whispers of distant mountains and secret streams. Eli's legs ached from his previous encounters with the horses, the soreness a constant reminder of the cost of courage. Yet the pain was drowned by the sudden awareness that something or someone was out there vulnerable under the vast sky. He squinted against the sunlight, scanning the rolling hills and the scattered wildflowers that tipped the grasses like tiny bursts of color. That was when he saw her. Nayeli moved with a quiet grace that seemed almost inhuman, kneeling amidst a cluster of rare blooms he had never noticed before. Her hair, dark as raven feathers, caught the light, and her hands, delicate and careful, brushed against a flower as though she feared even the gentlest touch might harm it. She was completely alone. There was no sign of her companions or guardians, only the wind, the prairie, and the soft, almost reverent hum of the land around her. Eli knew instantly that she was unaware of the danger closing in. He noticed the slight tilt of her head, the way her lips parted as if speaking silently to the plant, and he felt a pang of urgency. A sudden shiver ran through him. This moment demanded action. 3 figures appeared over the rise of the hill, staggering in their drunkenness, faces flushed from sun and drink alike. The prospectors of Coyote Ridge. Their boots kicked up clouds of dust, hoofs clattered against the rocky soil, and their shouts tore across the quiet prairie like thunderclaps. Eli's heart thudded in his chest. He had known men like them before in small towns and saloons, but never so close, never so reckless, and never with the weight of immediate danger pressing down on him. He saw the gleam of their pistols, the careless way they charged forward, their horses wild-eyed and unpredictable. Nayeli did not notice them yet. She remained focused, the rare flower in her hand, her world isolated from the chaos approaching. Eli's thoughts raced. His mind, trained to measure, to weigh consequences and risk, did not hesitate. He recognized the unspoken equation. If he moved too slowly, if he delayed even a moment, disaster would strike. The sight of her, so serene and unprotected, struck something deep within him. The boy who had survived Dustwood Hollow by fading into shadows felt the familiar tug of responsibility, the instinctive pull to act where others could not. He remembered every bruise, every scar, every lesson from his lonely childhood. Survival often required more than invisibility. Sometimes it demanded courage even when it hurt. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sweat and dust, and the sound of the approaching hooves grew louder. Naeli's concentration faltered as she finally glanced up, sensing something, though not yet the danger. Eli ran. His movements were deliberate, every muscle straining, his body screaming in protest from old aches and new tension. He closed the distance between them with a desperate speed that blurred the edges of the prairie around him. Time seemed to elongate, each second stretched taut with possibility and peril. Just as the first horse reached the flower patch, Eli dove, catching Naeli by the arm and shoving her out of the way. She stumbled but remained upright, her wide eyes reflecting shock and confusion. The hooves thundered past them, a narrow escape that left dust and grass in their wake. Eli rolled onto the ground, every bone in his body complaining, a sharp, searing pain igniting in his back and legs. The prospectors shouted, their voices lost to the wind as they galloped by, unaware of the boy who had intervened. Eli could barely breathe, yet the sight of Naeli's safe filled him with a fragile surge of relief. He lay there for a moment, chest heaving, the prairie spinning around him in dizzying waves. Naeli knelt beside him, her hand trembling as she touched his shoulder, murmuring words he couldn't quite comprehend. Her presence was calming, and yet the moment was precarious. The danger had passed, but the consequences were only beginning. He knew the tribe would take him in, nurse his wounds, and in doing so, change the course of his life entirely. This single action, born of instinct, bravery, and necessity, was a hinge, a pivot point that would swing his world from obscurity into a life of connection, challenge, and belonging. As Eli struggled to rise with her help, he noticed the broader world in ways he never had before. The intricate patterns of the prairie, the subtle call of birds hidden among the grasses, the distant outline of hills that promised both refuge and exposure. Every sound, every movement felt magnified. The boy who had once walked unnoticed in the shadows now recognized that action had weight, that choice had consequences, and that courage could carve paths where none seemed possible. Naeli's eyes searched his face, as if trying to measure the extent of his injuries and perhaps the depth of his courage. Eli gave a weak, determined smile, masking the pain that ran through him like fire. There was no time for rest. Not yet. Not when the prairie, the wind, and the distant echoes of those drunken men reminded him that danger had a way of lingering. He helped Naeli to her feet fully, supporting her, and together they began the trek back toward the Lakota camp. Each step was slow, laborious, yet purposeful. Each step carried them further from immediate danger and closer to a life Eli had never imagined. A life where he might be more than invisible. A life where action and consequence intertwined in ways that could reshape everything he thought he knew about himself. For Eli Turner, the orphan of Dustwood Hollow, this was the first moment of a new existence. The moment when bravery intersected with necessity, when choice revealed destiny, and when the simple act of stepping forward to protect another marked the beginning of a journey that would demand all he had and more. In the windswept prairie, under the vast, indifferent sky, Eli discovered that courage was more than a concept from books. It was a pulse, a decision, a force that could change the path of a life in a single heartbeat. Eli's body ached with a pain so intense it seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Every movement sent sharp jolts through his back and legs, yet he forced himself onward, driven by the instinct that had saved Naeli. Each step was a battle, a negotiation between will and physical limitation. He felt the rough prairie soil beneath his boots, the uneven terrain pressing against his weary muscles, and yet he did not slow. The thought of leaving Naeli vulnerable, even for a moment, was intolerable. In his past life, Eli had survived by being unseen, by yielding to danger rather than confronting it. Now, confronting it was not a choice, it was survival, not just his own, but hers. The Lakota camp lay ahead, nestled along a gentle rise where the grasses thinned and the scent of wood smoke drifted through the air. The sounds of life reached him. Laughter, conversation, the clatter of tools and cooking fires. It was foreign, yet comforting, a stark contrast to the desolate hollows of Dustwood. Eli felt a cautious hope, fragile but persistent, that he might find help there, that the people within would recognize the urgency of his injuries and the danger that still lurked. Naeli, sensing his strain, placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. Her touch was gentle but firm, a grounding presence against the storm of pain and adrenaline coursing through him. As they approached the camp, Eli saw the figures of the Lakota moving with purpose, tending to daily tasks yet alert to the rhythms of their surroundings. His eyes caught the gaze of a few warriors who paused, observing him and Nayeli with measured curiosity. Eli's instincts, honed through years of cautious observation and quiet endurance, immediately registered the tension. He was an outsider, a stranger, and yet the urgency of his arrival spoke louder than any social boundary. Every step closer intensified the pain, yet also strengthened his resolve. He knew that retreat was not an option. Suddenly, the memory of the stampede flashed in his mind. The thundering hooves, the chaos, the near brush with death. The fear he had felt in those moments, the shock that had frozen many, had propelled him into action. He realized, with a clarity born of extreme circumstance, that action was not only about survival but also about agency. He could no longer be the passive observer of his own life. Each choice, each movement, carried consequences that rippled outward. The decision to act, despite the agony, was itself transformative. The entrance to the camp widened, revealing Chief Lakota himself, a tall man with calm, penetrating eyes and an aura of authority that seemed to command the very wind. Beside him, several elders and warriors paused, hands resting lightly on weapons yet showing no immediate threat. Eli knew, even without words, that his next actions would determine how they perceived him, whether as a liability, a threat, or someone worthy of trust. He tightened his jaw against the pain, focusing on the singular truth. Nayeli was safe because he had acted. That act alone could speak volumes about his character, if only he could reach the protection of the camp. With the last stretch of prairie between them, Eli adjusted his stance, moving deliberately to shield Nayeli from any potential threat, whether human or animal. His arms, though trembling, were steady, his posture protective. Every instinct trained in Dustwood Hollow, the careful observation, the calculation of risk, the anticipation of threats, merged with the raw courage that had driven him to act in the first place. The boy who had survived invisibly was now visible, acting boldly in full view, a stark departure from the life he had known. Upon reaching the central area of the camp, Eli collapsed to his knees, exhaustion finally overtaking his adrenaline. Nayeli supported him, lowering him gently onto a mat of furs prepared for such emergencies. The Lakota immediately moved around him with efficiency and care, examining his injuries with practiced hands. One warrior offered clean water, another applied poultices to his bruised limbs, while a healer spoke softly, asking questions and assessing his condition. Eli, overwhelmed by the sudden attention and kindness, felt a strange sensation he had never experienced before: belonging. For the first time, he was not just a survivor. He was seen, recognized, valued. Chief Lakota approached, his eyes narrowing slightly in assessment before softening in acknowledgement. "You have courage, young man," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience and authority. "You risked your life for another. That is not a small thing." Eli, gasping from pain and relief, managed a nod, feeling the warmth of approval without fully understanding its implications. Nayeli, kneeling beside him, offered a grateful smile, her eyes bright with relief and admiration. Eli felt a connection, fragile yet undeniable, to the girl whose life had depended on his swift action. As he lay on the furs, pain radiating through every muscle, Eli realized that this moment marked a profound turning point. His decision to act, despite fear, despite pain, despite the unknown, had set in motion a chain of events far beyond his imagining. The Lakota camp was no longer a distant curiosity. It was now a place where he could heal, learn, and perhaps even belong. The act of saving Nayeli had transformed him from a boy defined by invisibility and endurance into someone whose choices mattered, whose presence had tangible impact. Hours passed as Eli rested, supported by the tribe's care. The sounds of the camp, the laughter of children, the crackle of fire, the murmur of conversation, became a comforting backdrop to his recovery. He observed the Lakota, noting the strength of their community, the respect they held for one another, the way each individual contributed to the whole. It was unlike anything he had known in Dustwood Hollow, a revelation that stirred both awe and longing. Here, courage and compassion were not anomalies but woven into the fabric of life itself. By evening, Eli felt the first true sense of hope in his life. The pain remained, fierce and insistent, yet beneath it lay a growing understanding. This action, this singular act of bravery, had reshaped his existence. He had stepped forward when it mattered, acted decisively when hesitation could have meant disaster, and in doing so had begun a transformation that would continue to unfold. The boy who had hidden in shadows now lay visible, acknowledged, and needed. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time, it was his to navigate with agency and purpose. The tranquility of the Lakota camp was short-lived. Word traveled faster than the prairie wind, carried by scouts and travelers who knew the hidden paths and narrow trails connecting Dustwood Hollow and the plains. By midday, whispers had reached Dustwood Hollow itself. Eli Turner, the invisible orphan boy, had disappeared under circumstances that some chose to describe as mysterious, others as alarming. Panic mixed with anger among the townsfolk, and the man who most embodied both, the ruthless Grady Voss, took notice immediately. Grady was known for his relentless pursuit of profit, power, and control, a man whose reputation was built on fear, manipulation, and violence. He viewed Eli's disappearance not as a tragedy or coincidence but as a challenge to his authority and his interests. Grady's compound was a ramshackle mansion perched at the edge of town, its walls shadowed by overgrown trees and jagged fences. Within, he assembled a group of men hardened by labor, liquor, and lawlessness. Faces were stern, eyes cold, hands calloused from gun handles and shovels. Weapons were checked, polished, and loaded with meticulous care. Grady's voice, low and commanding, cut through the murmurs of preparation. The boy hasn't wandered off on his own. The Lakota have him, they've taken him, and if we don't act, they'll make him one of their own. That will not happen. We will bring him back, alive or dead, and we will remind that tribe why Dustwood Hollow rules these lands. His words were heavy with menace, a chilling promise of confrontation. Eli, still recovering in the Lakota camp, could not yet move freely, his injuries slowing each step and reminding him of the fragility of life. Yet his senses, honed by years of vigilance, detected the tension in the air long before the first men appeared. Scouts reported distant dust clouds rising against the horizon, the unmistakable rhythm of horses' hooves, heavy and determined. The camp stirred into action. Warriors readied their weapons, sharpened spears, and checked bows, while women and elders guided the children and secured the perimeter. Eli watched, heart pounding not from fear alone but from a dawning understanding. The world he had briefly glimpsed, a world of safety and care, was now threatened by the outside cruelty he had fled from for years. When Grady's men arrived on the edge of the Lakota lands, their presence was unmistakable. Horses snorted, hooves churned up clouds of dust, and crude banners, improvised from strips of cloth, signaled their intent. They called out, demanding Eli's return, accusing the tribe of kidnapping. Their words were loud and forceful, but the cadence revealed their uncertainty, their fear masked by bluster. Eli, though still limping, stepped forward to face them. Pain lanced through his leg, yet his posture was firm, shoulders squared, eyes blazing with the quiet ferocity of someone defending not only themselves but others who could not protect themselves. "You don't scare us," Eli said, his voice surprisingly steady given the throbbing ache in his body. "You're here for a boy, but you've forgotten why you came. It wasn't me you sought. It was your own greed, your own cowardice, your own shame." The prospectors paused, startled by the courage of a boy who had, until moments ago, been presumed helpless. Their leader, Grady Voss, stepped forward, face a mask of fury and disbelief. "You'll regret this, boy," he spat, hand hovering near his holster. "You're a stranger here. The Lakota have no claim over you. They took you and now you will return. Or..." His threat hung in the air, incomplete, heavy with menace. Chief Lakota moved beside Eli, a pillar of calm authority. His voice, firm and resonant, carried across the open plain. "You are mistaken, Grady Voss," he said. "This boy came to us by his own choice, and in protecting one of our own, he has proven his character. Your accusations are lies, meant to disguise your crimes. This land and these people will not bend to fear or intimidation." The words cut through the tension like a knife. The men of Dustwood Hollow faltered, murmuring among themselves as the weight of the chief's authority pressed down. It was then that the revelation struck the assembly like lightning. Grady, whose face had been pale with anger, grew visibly more tense, shifting nervously. The elders of the Lakota, eyes sharp and knowing, spoke in low, deliberate tones. "The amulet," one said. "You took it from us long ago. The boy's arrival has exposed your theft and your threat to Nayeli. The truth can no longer be hidden." Gasps spread among Grady's men. The stolen amulet, an object of sacred significance to the tribe, had been the source of long-standing tension, though few outside the tribe had understood its meaning. Its theft was the shadow that had haunted Nayeli and her people, a reminder of betrayal and danger that predated Eli's arrival. The atmosphere became electric. Eli, despite his injuries, felt a surge of clarity and power. He had acted to save a life, and now the ripple of that action was exposing deceit and corruption, threatening men who had relied on intimidation and secrecy for years. Every step, every choice, every risk he had taken converged in this moment. "You didn't come for me," Eli said, voice rising, carrying across the plain with astonishing force. "You came to save yourselves. You came to hide your crimes, to cover your lies. But no more. You cannot intimidate the truth, nor can you escape it." Grady's hands shook visibly, his confidence cracking as the implications of exposure sank in. His men, once brash and loud, now shifted uneasily, uncertain whom to trust or follow. The Lakota warriors stepped forward, bowstrings taut, spears raised, not to attack, but to signal readiness, discipline, and the protection of their own. The dust of the plains swirled around them like an aura of defiance. Eli's presence, though still marked by injury and exhaustion, became a symbol. He was no longer just a boy. He was a force of integrity, a living testament to the consequences of courage, a catalyst exposing the hypocrisy and cowardice of those who had wronged others for personal gain. Grady finally faltered, a low growl of frustration escaping him as he realized his position had collapsed. The threat he had brought to the plains, meant to dominate and intimidate, now confronted undeniable truth. The tribe's unity, Eli's bravery, and the exposure of the stolen amulet converged to dismantle the power he had wielded with impunity for so long. One by one, his men lowered weapons, their faces pale, uncertainty written in every line. The balance of power had shifted. Eli's intervention, his choice to act in that single fateful moment on the prairie, had set into motion a chain reaction that would reverberate far beyond the camp's borders, exposing lies and safeguarding lives. The men of Dustwood Hollow retreated slowly, humiliated, shaken, and powerless against the combined force of truth and courage. Grady Voss, glaring but defeated, mounted his horse last, casting a final, futile glance at Eli before disappearing into the horizon. Eli stood with difficulty, every step a testament to endurance and resolve. Nayeli approached, her expression a mixture of relief, admiration, and gratitude. Chief Lakota nodded, eyes warm with approval, acknowledging both the boy's bravery and the righteousness of the tribe's stand. In that moment, Eli understood fully that courage carried consequences, but also rewards. His choice to act, despite pain, fear, and uncertainty, had safeguarded lives, restored justice, and earned trust. The threat had been neutralized, but more importantly, Eli had proven that his presence mattered, that even a boy once invisible could stand boldly in the face of corruption and danger, altering the fate of many through courage, choice, and decisive action. The prairie was alive with tension, the air thick with dust, the scent of sweat and sun-baked earth blending into an almost tangible electricity. Eli Turner, still limping from his injuries but standing taller than ever in purpose, faced the men of Dustwood Hollow. They had come with intimidation, greed, and the expectation of obedience, but what confronted them now was not fear. It was courage, clarity, and the righteous authority of a boy who had learned that action had consequences far greater than himself. Every ache in his body, every bruise, every muscle screaming in protest, became a testament to endurance, to choice, to the reality that one life could influence many. "You didn't come for me?" Eli declared, voice carrying across the plain, steady despite the pain radiating from his limbs. "You came to save yourselves, to hide your lies, to protect your crimes. Not one of you came here for justice, for morality, or for anything noble. You came here because your own fear made you act. You cannot threaten truth, nor can you bend courage to your will." His words cut like a blade through the haze of dust, silence falling across the tense assembly. Even the horses seemed to pause, as if listening. The men of Dustwood Hollow faltered, glances darting from each other, doubt creeping into their eyes. They had expected compliance, terror, perhaps even submission, but not the clarity of moral courage, not the fearless stand of a boy who had nothing to lose and everything to protect. Chief Lakota stepped forward beside him, the authority of a lifetime etched into his posture, his voice carrying calm strength. "This boy is no hostage," he said. "He came to us by choice. He acted to protect one of our own, and in doing so, he has shown the value of his heart and spirit. Your accusations are hollow, your threats meaningless. We will not yield to fear or corruption. Your actions have long been known to us, the theft of the sacred amulet, the intimidation of our people, the lies you cloak as justice. You have no standing here. You have come seeking control, and yet you find only truth standing against you." Grady Voss, the self-assured, ruthless leader, felt his veneer of dominance cracking. He had come prepared to enforce obedience, to instill fear, to drag Eli back to Dustwood Hollow regardless of right or wrong. But the weight of exposure and the unwavering unity of the tribe left him trembling. The stolen amulet, the sacred object he had thought hidden, forgotten by the world, was now central to the confrontation. The elders of the Lakota had revealed the theft, their calm accusation a sword cutting through years of deception. Grady's men exchanged uneasy glances, realization dawning that the power they had relied upon, the authority they had wielded through lies and intimidation, had been undermined by courage, by principle, and by truth. Eli's gaze did not waver. He could feel the pain in his back and legs, the lingering soreness of every injury from the stampede, but he drew strength from the knowledge that action, even when costly, could reshape the fate of many. He could see the disbelief in Grady's eyes, the tension in the shoulders of the prospectors, the hesitant murmurs of uncertainty among those who had expected fear to dominate. Eli understood, with a clarity sharpened by years of survival, that this confrontation was not merely about himself or Naeli. It was about exposing injustice, defending those who could not defend themselves, and asserting that moral courage could outweigh brute force. Grady's voice cracked as he attempted a threat, but the words fell flat. You can't," he began, but no one listened. The unity of the tribe, the moral weight of Eli's stand, and the undeniable truth of the stolen amulet rendered his threats hollow. Each attempt at intimidation collapsed under scrutiny. The boys and men of Dustwood Hollow looked on, unsure of their footing, their confidence eroded by the revelation that their leader's authority had been built on deception and cowardice. Eli, standing firm, embodied the principle that one choice, made with clarity and courage, could ripple outward and overturn lies that had persisted for years. A hush fell over the plain. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the dry grass. Yet in the midst of shadow and light, the triumph of truth and courage shone brightly. Chief Lakota's voice, steady and commanding, reinforced the lesson. Leave now, and carry the knowledge of your deeds with you. Do not return seeking to challenge the truth or the justice of this people. Grady, finally realizing the futility of resistance, mounted his horse, the realization of defeat plain on his face. The other men followed, hesitant, ashamed, their retreat a visual affirmation of the power of principle over intimidation. Nayeli approached Eli, her expression a mixture of relief, gratitude, and awe. "You risked yourself for me?" she said softly, voice trembling. "Even knowing the danger, you acted anyway." Eli, still catching his breath, offered a weak smile, the corners of his lips lifting despite exhaustion and pain. "I couldn't do otherwise," he said quietly. "It wasn't just about you, it was about what's right. I couldn't stand by while others were hurt. While you were hurt." Her eyes, wide and shining in the golden light of the prairie sun, met his, and in that exchange, a silent understanding passed between them. Courage was not born from desire for recognition, but from necessity, from the instinct to protect and act when action was required. The tribe began to settle again, the tension slowly dissolving into the comforting rhythms of daily life. Warriors returned to their stations, elders resumed their tasks, and children emerged cautiously, curiosity replacing fear. Eli, supported by Nayeli and the careful guidance of the Lakota, took measured steps among them, sensing, for the first time, a place in a community that recognized both his actions and his worth. Pain still pulsed through him, but it was tempered by a new awareness. The consequences of bravery were real, tangible, and ultimately rewarding. He had acted decisively, and in doing so had preserved life, exposed deceit, and earned respect and trust. As the last figures of Dustwood Hollow disappeared over the distant rise, the prairie returned to its natural rhythm. The wind whispered through the grass, birds resumed their calls, and the sun cast its warm glow over the settlement. Eli stood among the people who had welcomed him, healed him, and supported him, and for the first time he felt a profound sense of belonging. The boy who had once survived by fading into the background had stepped fully into the light, proving that courage, even in the smallest hands, could shape destiny. In that moment, Eli Turner was no longer invisible. He was a protector, a witness, and a participant in a larger story of justice, loyalty, and honor. His actions leaving an indelible mark on the lives of those around him and the history of the prairie itself. The prairie evening settled like a warm blanket over the Lakota camp, softening the harsh edges of the day into calm, golden light. The wind no longer carried the urgency of danger. It whispered through the tall grasses in gentle waves, weaving a serene melody that seemed to echo the relief and quiet joy of those who had endured a day of tension and confrontation. Eli Turner, still recovering from injuries that left him sore and limping, walked slowly among the camp, supported by Nayeli and guided by the watchful presence of the elders. Every step was measured, yet purposeful, a reflection of the balance between physical fragility and the new strength that had grown within him over the past hours and days. Chief Lakota observed him with a calm, steady gaze. There was pride in the chief's eyes, tempered by the recognition of the pain Eli had endured. The boy's courage had not only preserved life, but had also reshaped the dynamics between the Lakota and the outside world. Yet this was more than just a demonstration of bravery. It was the beginning of a transformation, the subtle emergence of belonging where once there had been only invisibility and solitude. Chief Lakota approached, his footsteps deliberate, and placed a firm, fatherly hand on Eli's shoulder. "Your courage is clear," he said quietly, voice rich with authority and warmth. "But courage alone is not the measure of a life. You have shown respect, care, and determination. For these reasons, it is my honor to declare that you are now one of us. You are my son, Eli Turner, and this tribe is your home." The words struck Eli with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and gratitude. His past life in Dustwood Hollow, filled with loneliness, hardship, and invisibility, felt simultaneously distant and impossibly real. He had survived by hiding, by remaining unseen, by learning to endure in silence. Yet now, in this moment under the vast sky of the prairie, he was being claimed not by obligation, but by choice and recognition. The tribe, whose ways and values he had only begun to understand, had offered him family, protection, and acceptance. The feeling was overwhelming. A warmth that seeped into his bones and lingered in his chest, a sensation of being truly seen for the first time in his life. Nayeli stepped forward, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. "You belong here," she said softly, her voice steady despite the lingering excitement of the day. "We belong together in this place as part of this tribe. You acted not for reward, but for life, for me, and for what was right. That is why you are one of us." Her gaze held his, steady and sincere, and in that moment, Eli realized that belonging was not simply a matter of acceptance. It was the recognition of shared values, courage, and the choice to act when necessary, even at personal cost. The tribe gathered around them, the children curious and eager, the warriors alert yet relaxed, and the elders nodding with approval. Their faces reflected the sense of continuity and tradition. Yet there was also an unmistakable welcome, a recognition that Eli had earned his place among them. He felt a profound sense of connection not just to Nayeli or Chief Lakota, but to the community as a whole. This was a network of people who acted for one another, who valued integrity and bravery, and who understood the weight of consequences in a way he had never experienced before. Eli's injuries still throbbed with the memory of recent trials, the stampede, the confrontation with Grady Voss, the exhausting strain of standing firm against armed men. But these pains were now woven into a narrative of growth, purpose, and triumph. Each ache reminded him of the courage he had shown and the lives he had touched. He understood, more clearly than ever, that life was not a matter of passive endurance but of active engagement. Choices, especially courageous ones, could redefine existence, forge bonds, and create a home where previously there had been none. Chief Lakota spoke again, this time addressing the entire gathering. "Eli Turner has chosen to walk with us, to learn, and to serve. He will train with our warriors not only to protect himself but to protect this community, this way of life, and those who cannot defend themselves. In doing so, he will honor both his courage and the responsibility that comes with belonging." The elders nodded in agreement, and the warriors murmured their approval. Eli felt a deep sense of solemn pride. This was more than recognition, it was a promise, a commitment that his actions would have lasting meaning, that he could shape the future of the tribe as they had shaped his present. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the prairie in hues of orange, pink, and deep violet, Eli stood at the edge of the camp, gazing across the rolling landscape that had once seemed so alien. The wind carried the sense of earth, smoke, and distant flowers, mingling into a symphony of the familiar and the newly discovered. He felt the weight of the past, the loneliness, the hardship, the silence of Dustwood Hollow, but also the lightness of the present. The laughter of children, the gentle murmur of the fires, the steady presence of those who had claimed him as one of their own. Night fell gradually, stars emerging one by one, scattered across the velvet sky in a glittering expanse of infinity. Eli sat by the fire with Nayeli, Chief Lakota nearby, and the tribe settling into the rhythms of evening life. The warmth of the flames mirrored the warmth in his heart. For the first time he felt safe, connected, and valued. His past as an orphan, shaped by grief and invisibility, had not been erased, but it had been transformed. It now served as a foundation for resilience, empathy, and courage, a testament to the journey that had brought him to this point. In the quiet moments, Eli reflected on the days that had led him here. The stampede, the moment of action, the confrontation with Grady Voss, and the trust he had earned. Each event had been a thread, weaving together a tapestry of experience, consequence, and growth. The boy who had once believed life demanded nothing of him now understood that every choice could carry profound impact. Every act of bravery could forge bonds, and every decision to protect others could lead to belonging, family, and purpose. Under the starlit prairie sky, Eli Turner finally felt at home. The orphan of Dustwood Hollow, once defined by invisibility and hardship, had become a son, a protector, and a part of a community that valued courage, honor, and compassion. The world around him, once harsh and indifferent, now seemed expansive and alive, filled with possibility, connection, and the quiet certainty that he had found his place. A home under the infinite stars, a life intertwined with those who would stand by him, and a future shaped by choices made with courage and heart.